The number of homeless vets in this country is staggering, and a St. Louis photographer tells their story through his work. That's next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter, and welcome to City Corner. I want you to take a close look at these photographs. These individuals were American soldiers who served our country. Now they're homeless, faceless, and forgotten. St. Louis photographer Jerry Tovo traveled across the country to capture these images and to tell a unique and heart-wrenching, maybe heartwarming story. I guess it depends how you look at it. Jerry Tovo, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Good to be here.
It's good to have you here. You know, when we talk about the numbers of homeless veterans, it's hard to believe.
Oh, absolutely. It's well, that's what caught my attention in the first place. You know, I had no idea until a couple of years ago just how many people are out in the street.
And I guess nobody knows for sure the exact number, but what's the best guess?
Well, the government has their specific numbers, and they claim to be able to control that census. They're saying, you know, somewhere between 60 and 70,000 people on the street every night. In our experience, I think it's a lot more than that, but we've learned we have sort of to yield to the government numbers at this point.
60 or 70,000, and that's just a guess, every night.
Yeah.
Homeless, homeless individuals who used to be soldiers.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
And I saw some incredible figure that said that it could be like more than 1 million are at risk of becoming homeless.
And it's growing because of the Middle Eastern war. PTSD is running rampant, and sexual abuse is causing a great deal of PTSD. And that's particularly sad, you know, that our people are creating their own, you know, haphazard sort of defeatism.
Right. There are a lot of stories behind the scenes about why these people end up where they are, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And you also have a sort of a personal connection to this, and we'll talk about that later too. But let's make the point that your work, these photographs, are currently on display at the Missouri History Museum and will be till January 20th of 2014.
That's right.
Something like a 6,000-foot exhibit.
It is the perfect venue. I could not, if I designed it, I couldn't ask for a better venue than
Why?
It is spacious. They were generous enough to make very large prints. The impact is enormous. The lighting is very specific to the prints, and it's a quiet, pensive place, and people just sort of get taken in by the whole experience.
All right. Why don't we look at an image and you tell me what you remember about this individual and when, where, and when this photograph was taken, and then I've got a lot of questions for you.
Yeah. This was in Chicago, and probably our worst shoot, you know, technically and meteorologically. It was a crappy day, if I can say that. I mean, it was rainy, cold, windy. We work with like a two-sided tent, and we had to have people manning the tent to keep us from blowing it away. This particular gentleman sort of was a sleeper. His addiction is to gambling, and there's very little help for him through the VA for that sort of an addiction, and he's trying to get help. But it's a sad case. He was in a shelter with a bunch of other people. And I should say probably 90% of the people we deal with have some sort of addiction. Unfortunately, even if they get some sort of a treatment, the numbers are so high they don't get a lot of personalized treatment. Not a lot of people will sit and listen to their story like we do sometimes. But he came out of nowhere. He reminded me of Forrest Whitaker when I first saw him, and it sort of drove the shoot. So.
Right, so you found him in Chicago. But what you actually did was you really traveled across the country to find these homeless vets. Tell me about your journey.
Yeah, actually, we've only covered about half of it at this point. We're at a little resting place now. But we've been to Chicago, we've been to Indianapolis, we've been to Washington, D.C., Nashville, Tennessee, and Florida on several occasions. And every trip is a different experience. Every person is a different story. Some of the stories are fairly anonymous. We can't really tell a lot because we're asking these people to be the poster child for our failure in some cases. So They really don't want a lot of attention. They're very gracious to let us use their images, and we're thankful for that.
Let's take a look at another one. This says, from the exhibition, I was a soldier at the Missouri History Museum.
This is my favorite. This is Damon. He's from Indianapolis, and he's one of those people that just cannot get a stable fix on his addictions. He's the nicest man in the world. He's very quiet, very sincere, and I loved him. He got it, and he's trying, but he just can't get it clean. He feels sure that this time he'll be fine, but he can't stay straight. Every time he gets himself on his feet, he falls back again.
Let's look at one more.
This is Daryl. Daryl's from Washington, D.C. We don't know a lot about Daryl, and that was an interesting thing because by the time we got to D.C., we pretty much had perfected our system of memory, so to speak. We shoot a little video of everybody, and it helps reinforce what we remember when we talk to these people. Unfortunately, since I'm not a videographer, I started this session with the microphone plugged in but not turned on. So I'm looking for a lip reader to get a little more information from Daryl, but he did come from the largest homeless shelter in the country, and he's a very honest, sincere man, but again, just can't get over that hump, and there's not enough people. This shelter is so full of people. I mean, it's just so full of people. It's a place for them to stay, but there's nothing there for them to really, to get back on track.
Why did you decide to shoot these images in black and white as opposed to color photographs?
My mark in the business has always been black and white. I've been a photographer for 45, going on much longer years, and I've shot commercially, and I certainly shoot color, and I do very well in color, but I just have felt at home with black and white, and the drama that you can create from black and white is quite amazing. I have a lot of control. The digital age has made that even better. Black and white on film was significant, but now that it's in digital, I mean, it's just amazing what you can do with black and white.
And because most of these people are going through a tough time, the black and white sort of, highlights the stark reality,
yeah,
and the suffering they're going through for some reason.
Yeah. There's kind of a thing I learned way back when I was an industrial photographer. We would be asked to do capital appropriations. This may get off the track a little bit, but whenever we had to make something look bad so that they could get the money they needed, we shot it in black and white. And then in the review of what the project was afterwards, we'd shoot it in color, because black and white really pulls out the grittiness, and that's really what I'm attracted to in this case. Yeah.
Let's take a look at the next photograph from your exhibition. We're talking with photographer Jerry Tovo.
Yes, this is his middle name is Cardinal, and that's how I remember him. He was a whistler. He whistled the entire time we shot, and it was just kind of a nervous little tick he had. But you could tell he wasn't comfortable, and he's barely willing to do this. But I just felt like the drama of the shot was just amazing, and it's pretty impressive. Also in D.C.
Let's go to the next one.
And this is the gal from down in Florida, down in Titusville, and she lives out in the swamp, so to speak. Elizabeth is her name, and she's a very nice lady, and I was very concerned for her. And when we talked mostly about her safety. I asked if she wasn't concerned living out, because she's out there by herself. She's not living with other people in that area. She had a young pit bull dog that was sort of her alarm system, but she was very confident that she could handle anything that would come along. And she loved to have a place. And there's the people we worked with down there, a very good group, very much aligned to what we're doing. And it's people we stay in touch with, but she was an interesting character.
I bet this photograph surprised some people watching it right now, because when you get the mental image of a homeless veteran, you just automatically think about a man, don't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's harder for us to come by women, because the women in the system do get more protection, and the shelters and the government agencies really don't want you around them. They're couch surfers. They usually take them into houses, and they sleep on people's couches from time to time. But yeah, there are a lot of them, and there are families out there with children that are homeless, that are veterans.
What was it like when you travel around to these locations and approach these homeless people? Now, it's not like you put an ad in the paper and they showed up at a convention hall for you to interview. You might go to an area under a bridge or behind a warehouse, right? And find them, so what was that like? How did you find them and how did you approach them?
Interesting that Nashville did have a convention of sorts of homeless people.
Oh, really?
And I thought we were finally covered for someplace where you could find a lot of subjects. But when you go into an auditorium with 1,500 people, it's very difficult just to walk up to them and say, are you a homeless veteran? You know, it's just to single them out of a crowd. It was very difficult. And we ended up just finding people on the street in Nashville, and it's kind of become our model. We don't like to go to a city without having some boots on the ground, have some information. But out of desperation, we just started talking to some people in the tourist area in Nashville, and it worked out really well because the one guy who surfaced out of there became an advocate, and it became a feel-good story afterwards. But if you can find one person that gets what we're doing, they'll generally recruit for you, and we'll find people that way.
But didn't you find people that maybe were suspicious of you and scared of you, or?
Not scared so much, but suspicious, yes. And a lot of these folks don't want to be found. I mean, they're in places where they're safe away from, you know, whatever. You know, some unfortunately have people looking for child support money, and some have people who have warrants for drunkenness or whatever else. So they're not big on, you know, getting their face in public. Mm-hmm.
Let's take a look at one more image before we go to our break.
Yeah.
What do you remember about him?
James from D.C. He's the second oldest member of our collection at this point. He was a lifer until his wife died, and he was forced to come home and take care of his family. And he's
a lifer, you mean full-time military?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. And he has a disability and then some kind of a brain defect that his tongue won't stay in his mouth, and it was a very careful situation to photograph him because I didn't want to take advantage of that. In this picture, you can see a little bit of his tongue, and I actually asked him to see if he could control it a little bit. But as we're taking a picture of him, I said, James, you're a very distinguished-looking man, and he mumbled, "I try," he said. Sweet guy, and I just felt so sorry for him.
Well, there's a lot still to talk about when we come back from the break. Let's talk a little bit about how these people end up where they are, because there are reasons, varied reasons for it.
Yeah.
And a little bit about more your project. This project is an ongoing project that you're doing too.
Yeah.
Jerry Tovo is our guest. He's a photographer who's documented the lives of homeless veterans. It's now on display at the Missouri History Museum, and we'll be back after this.
G-morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Text me. Are your parents home later? We can hang. LUV, love you. JK. Holla back. Holla back. Holla back. Are you with your friends? That's lame. We're in a huge fight right now. XO. What'd you dream about? Something I did? Are you on your way to the mall? I'm lonely. Nude pics. Send me some. Text me.
Experience St. Louis!
This financial advisor is being accused of committing one of the largest investment frauds in the history of the United States.
I guess we're not going to Aspen. That's fine. You see, I like tennis balls. He likes insider trading. So he's going to jail and I'm going to a shelter. And no, they're not the same thing. Shelters are for good pets that want to be adopted. Jails are for criminals. I've done nothing. Uh-oh. Ooh, okay, I stole a cheeseburger once. I'm a dog.
For those dealing with the struggles of caring for a loved one, we hear you. Visit aarp.org/caregiving for advice and support.
Over 13 million people are affected by famine, war, and drought in the Horn of Africa. Make a simple text donation of $10.
But do more than donate. Forward the facts.
I'm Steve Potter, and welcome back to City Corner. I Was a Soldier is a current exhibition at the Missouri History Museum. It's up until January 20th of 2014. And the exhibition consists of photographs by St. Louis photographer Jerry Tovo, who is our guest today. And Jerry, they're calling it at the Missouri History Museum, I Was a Soldier. That's not the name of your project, though.
That's correct. I Was a Soldier actually was an outcropping of some of the phrases that we liked. The actual name of the project is called They May Have Been Heroes, the Homeless Veterans Project.
And this is ongoing.
It is ongoing. We've covered the first half, and in my mission...
First half of the country?
First half of the country, yes. Mostly from the Mississippi River east and south and north. But in my mission I said that I wanted to cover the country, and even though it's such an outstanding exhibit now, people said, why bother? I just feel like I owe it to the project to finish it out. So.
And what you're doing is traveling the country, finding homeless veterans, people who were soldiers at one time and have come back and for whatever reason are homeless, and you're capturing their images and helping to tell their stories, really.
Yeah, it was meant to be an awareness project because so many people just really don't know how serious this problem is. And we'd hope that we'd have a gala opening in Washington, D.C., and have all the politicians, the movers and shakers, and the people who could fund this privately, have them there and kind of smack them upside their head and let them know really what's out there.
And I think you said earlier, 40, 60,000 homeless veterans on the street every night, we don't really know?
Yeah, I would say 60 to 70 every night.
And maybe over 1 million that could be?
At risk, yeah. And some come in, go, some find housing, come back out. And so it's in flux. And you have to say, it's not just, we call it homeless, but it's not just giving them a place to live. There's so much more involved. It's rehabilitation, job training, job placement, resocialization.
Right. Before we go any farther, let's take a look at some more photographs. You traveled half the country so far to find homeless veterans. You meet them where they live, and you photographed them.
Yeah, this is LaRod, and I didn't have a strong feeling about LaRod when I first started shooting. It just didn't seem really the typical or what we had. But the longer the conversation went on, the more his face showed what actually was inside him. There's a lot of cover-up. There's a lot of people who are playing the game and acting. Some act like they are homeless when they're not. Some act like they're not homeless when they are. But his really surfaced, and the grimace on his face here really caught my attention.
Let's look at another one.
This is my hero. This is Jay, and when I say he's my hero, Jay did a little video clip for us, and we asked them some standard questions. What do you say to those people out there who are skeptics about you homeless veterans out here? And Jay came right to the point. He just said exactly, if I had written it, I couldn't have said any better. He said, God bless this country. I'd live and die for this country. But this country's just not doing enough for its homeless people. It's hard out here.
Let's look at the next one.
This is one of those people it's a unique story. Joseph, we've just found on the street down in Florida. He was looking very helpless and lonely, and we asked him, and he was a vet, and he said, oh, I'm a vet. And it's one of those things that you'd find hard to believe because he got out and went to live with his family, and his family threw him out. They couldn't cope with him, he couldn't cope with them, so they threw him out on the street again, and he was in a position where his papers were lost. Recently, maybe 10 years ago, there was a big fire out here in Page Avenue where they lost a lot of records.
Right.
So his records had been lost, and he couldn't get benefits from the VA, and he didn't have a family, and he couldn't find work. So he was just cruising and doing what he could do, but a very quiet, desperate man.
Well, one thing that's become very apparent, Jerry, looking at all these, is that everybody has their own story, right?
Absolutely.
There are a million reasons these people could be homeless.
Yeah.
You mentioned the post-traumatic stress.
Yeah. Coping is the 100% of the answers. A lot of these people cannot cope because of the authority and the structure that was in the military. When they get out, they lost that structure and they can't cope without it. Some people can't cope with it, and others like Joseph here, he just was without family and he had nothing to turn to.
Well, and quite frankly, perhaps some of these people had issues before they went into the military. It's not necessarily something that happened there, although often it was, I'm sure.
Absolutely. There was a guy in Indianapolis whose name was Ronnie, and Ronnie was a huge alcoholic. And we talked about it. I said, "What did you do before the Army?" And he said, "Well, actually, I drank a lot, and it came down to the court gave me an option to either go into rehab or go into the Army." And I took the Army. Go into jail. Sorry, go to jail or go. So I took the Army. And I said, "Does the Army straighten you out?" He said, "Oh my gosh, no." He said, "It just multiplied." He said, "I drank so much in the Army, and by the time I got out, I was out of control."
You and I did a radio interview a while back, and you made the point about how I can't remember the words you used, but how some of these soldiers were encouraged to drink while they were serving.
Absolutely. And I don't really have the scientific reason for that, but it feels like it settles them down, them being the soldiers. A lot of these guys come in there, they're gunslingers, and they're anxious to go crazy in some cases, but they like to keep them settled down. And smoking, they encourage them to smoke too. And I don't think they have signs up saying, "We want you to smoke," but I think from what I understand, every chance they get, there's alcohol available and there are cigarettes aplenty.
Didn't do them any favors in the long run, did it?
Oh, absolutely not. And so a lot of these people went into the Army clean, sober, and straight, and came out addicts.
Let's look at another image from the exhibition "I Was a Soldier" at the Missouri History Museum.
This is Johnny, and Johnny was one of those guys that just really portrayed what we're looking for here. I didn't, again, when I first saw him, I'm thinking, I don't know if I can make something out of Johnny. But this is in D.C. He lived in that same house, the largest housing shelter in the country. There's not much to tell about Johnny's story, how he got there, other than that he's among the many who just really weren't really to open up a lot, but he was there and gracious enough to let us do that.
One thing I think is really interesting about your story, Jerry, is your story. You served in the military in the Vietnam War era. You didn't serve in Vietnam, but you were, what, a drill sergeant?
I was a drill sergeant, yeah.
And so there's a personal connection, I guess, you feel to these people.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some deep-seated feelings that I suffer from. I have a bit of a guilt complex that I didn't go to Vietnam. At the time, I was thrilled that I wasn't going to have to go. That being a drill sergeant was a stabilized tour of duty, which meant in my 2 years as a draftee that I would be at Fort Leonard Wood the whole time, and I was thrilled. But at some point, I realized that what I was doing was a serious job. At first, I took it lightly. This is really fun, bossing these young kids around my own age. But then it kind of dawned on me that I'm sending these guys over. I'm responsible for these guys going to Vietnam, and if I'm taking this too lightly, maybe I'm indirectly responsible for their fate.
And after the military, you had a pretty successful career as a commercial photographer. You worked for Kodak for a long time.
I was in the middle of my career. I worked 7 years for Kodak. It was kind of a break, and it was an amazing opportunity.
And see, I think it's such a great contrast between the pictures that we're looking at today that you took and what you did during your career, because you did glitzy, glamorous advertising, things we'd see in magazines.
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
Pretty stuff, not this stuff.
Yes, and I have been quoted, and probably rightly so, that at this point I said I don't do pretty, but I have done pretty in my career, and I loved it. I love doing beautiful things. But this is just such a perfect meld for what I do best and what was out there that needed something to be done.
Let's take a look at more images from the exhibition at the Missouri History Museum. Oh, gee.
Yes. This gentleman was down in Florida, and he goes by the name of Bluebeard, and he was very vocal about his experience. He was in Vietnam. He was a cordman, and he was emotionally wrought still. I mean, if you got him to thinking back about his tour of duties, he got very emotional, as you can see. It still hangs with him, and it's hard to shake.
Now, this has been up at the Missouri History Museum for a while. So you've probably talked to a lot of people that have seen it. What kind of feedback have you been getting?
It's a very emotional thing for most people. I don't know many people that don't go in and come out in a different mood than when they went in. There have been hundreds, and I'm told, of people who openly weep when they go there, and that's like a huge compliment for what I'm doing. But even my wife, who saw the images all along, when she went to the opening that night and she stood there. She just stood there and cried because she was so taken by it.
And what's so interesting is that there's so much emotion just in these, they're portraits. I mean, they're just people's faces. There's not a lot else there.
Yes, it's the hopelessness and despair. And I think when we do our show, if we eventually get into Washington, D.C., I think it'll be called In the Face of Patriotism in the Eyes of Despair, because that pretty much sums up what you see there.
Let's look at another image in the exhibition. We're talking with photographer Jerry Tovo.
Yeah, this is Ronnie from Indianapolis, and I alluded to earlier, he was the one who had the drinking problem before he went in, but it got magnified 100-fold. Ronnie is
does not look well.
Does not look well, and it's interesting you say that. Excuse me, because Ronnie died about 2 months ago. They found him on the street. He'd been dead for about a week, and
oh my.
he had been diagnosed with some sort of a lung disease, but he had no oxygen or anything with him at the time. So it was kind of a shock. It makes me think.
Jerry, I think that needs to be the last one we look at. So I want to ask you, in spite of everything that we've talked about and seen here today, there must have been experiences you had on the road when you were doing this that were not depressing. There must have been a positive story, maybe a glimpse into someone's life that was positive and not all negative?
Absolutely. Almost every city we went to, we found somebody that got it, got the big picture. And I'm talking about the homeless veterans. And they got on board. They just loved that I was there. They loved that I was doing it. And they became part of the project. And probably the best story came down in Nashville. And it was one of those people who we just ran across down in the tourist section. His name was Jerry. And he got the big picture. And he's the guy that started this whole thing for me that said, you know, if you can come back tomorrow, I'll have 3 or 4 more people here for you to do it. And after we finished shooting, I pulled Jerry aside and I said, Jerry, I said, you know, I've shot a lot of people. I see the regimen. I know the kind, the type, and all what have you. But you seem to be a little above all this stuff. What are you doing here? And he stopped and he thought for a minute and didn't have a good answer. But I had an occasion to go back to Nashville a week later and I found Jerry and he said, you know, I have to tell you, since you were here, I got to think about what you said. And I found a job. The guy can keep me busy for a summer working, painting. And the local Operation Stand Down is going to pay for my bus tickets. He said, and I talked to my wife. I haven't talked to my wife in 6 years, and it looks like we might be getting back together again.
Wow.
And all this time I'm thinking, that is not what I set out to do. I'm not Mother Teresa in this. I'm just a photographer.
Wow.
But I thought, what a great story.
It is a great story. I have to cut you off there, unfortunately. But let me just encourage people to check out this exhibition. I Was a Soldier at the Missouri History Museum through January 20th of 2014. And we'll have information, and people, I guess, can find your website.
That'd be great. Yeah, theymayhavebeenheroes.com.
Theymayhavebeenheroes.com. Jerry Tovo, thank you so much. Very moving.
Steve. Thank you.
That's all the time we have for this edition of City Corner. Please join us again later. Thanks so much. We'll see you. Bye.